So most people, when they hear the name Drew Brees, they think of Super Bowl winning quarterback, MVP, 20 plus year career in the NFL, is one of the all-time best quarterbacks. But most people don't think of franchise mogul or, someone that's out there building a franchise empire when they hear the name Drew Brees. But, in the franchising world, Drew Brees' name is prominent and, carries a lot of weight because he's very, very involved. Hey, what's up? Thanks for dropping into another episode of the Path to Freedom podcast. If you caught my first episode of a new series I'm doing a few weeks ago, my franchisee spotlight series, you heard me talk about the largest franchisee in the world. And if you missed that, go back and check it out. We'll put a link to that episode in the show notes to make it easy for you to find. And then if you a regular listener of the podcast, either, I don't know, within the last several weeks, had a really cool episode come out with a gentleman by the name of Alex Yeater, who is a area representative for Everbowl. So an area representative basically is just, you are a franchisee, but you own the rights to states. Entire states, and in Alex's case, multiple states. And then as the area rep, you go out and try to bring in franchisees underneath you in the states that you own the rights to. And so basically it's a just slightly different model of franchising, where in between the franchisor and the actual franchisees, there's kind of another layer of support. Pretty cool model. But Alex explained in that episode that he is actually business partners with Drew Brees. So most people, when they hear the name Drew Brees, they think of Super Bowl winning quarterback, MVP, 20 plus year career in the NFL, is one of the all-time best quarterbacks. But most people don't think of franchise mogul or, someone that's out there building a franchise empire when they hear the name Drew Brees. But, in the franchising world, Drew Brees' name is prominent and, carries a lot of weight because he's very, very involved. As a franchisee, he's involved at the franchisor level, and at this point with quite a few different brands. So given the timing of, having Alex on the podcast as Drew Brees' business partner, I thought it would be cool to feature Drew Brees as the next franchisee that I wanted to spotlight here on the podcast. So a little bit of a backstory. Drew Brees played football at Purdue University. That's where he played his college ball prior to going professional. And so while he was there at Purdue, apparently he was an avid customer of Jimmy John's. And he loved the number 9 combo at Jimmy John's so much he ate it, 3 to 4 times a week. And so lo and behold, Jimmy John's was actually the first franchise that Drew Brees invested in. And it looks like this was in 2011. So still playing in the NFL actively when he first began to get into franchising and investing in franchises. So he was playing in New Orleans at the time. The Jimmy John's deal that he struck with them was to open 9 locations throughout the New Orleans area. And as far as I know, Drew Brees still owns and operates at least those 9 Jimmy John's locations there in New Orleans. From there, he got involved with a franchise called Walk-Ons Sports Bistro. And this is a sports bar type concept that started in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So kind of a Louisiana connection with Drew Brees. My wife and I briefly lived in Louisiana, so we've been to the original Walk-Ons many times, love the food, love the atmosphere. So while we were living there, they had started to expand down into New Orleans and other parts of Louisiana, but they weren't yet franchising at that time. So when they made the decision to start franchising, somehow or another, the founders had gotten hooked up with Drew Brees. He invested at the franchisor level. So he's a partner of Walk-Ons Sports Bistro at the franchisee level, but also as a franchisee, he's opened and continuing to open locations. I think his first one was in Texas, where he grew up, but he's developing locations for Walk-Ons across the Gulf Coast. Couldn't find an exact number of how many locations he's committed to opening or planning to open, but as a partner at the franchisor level, I imagine that he'll continue to open franchise locations as well. The founders of Walk-Ons have since created kind of a spin-off concept called Smalls Sliders. So one of the most popular menu items apparently is their slider burgers. I got to say, they're pretty good. I've had them several times myself. So they spun that off and are creating a concept built around these sliders, kind of drive through, very fast kind of, concept. I think they're using storage containers for the locations themselves. I've seen some pictures and it's a pretty cool concept. So, Drew Brees has apparently been involved in that since inception, again, at the franchisor level, but also will be opening locations as a franchisee. From Walk-Ons and Smalls in 2017, he signed a large development agreement with Dunkin Donuts, or what used to be Dunkin Donuts, now just Dunkin Brands. And that was a development agreement to bring 69 locations to the Louisiana area. And apparently he partnered with a longtime successful Dunkin franchisee, to help him with the operations and development of those locations, which I thought was kind of interesting and really a smart and strategic move on his part, to go and partner with someone that's already familiar and had success in that specific franchise brand. 2021, Drew Brees got involved with a concept called Stretch Zone. So Stretch Zone is a recovery kind of preventative, brand that falls into kind of the health and wellness category. They've got a proprietary strapping system that they use for customers while they're on the table, and they've got someone that's trained to help them stretch different parts of their body, whatever may be bothering them, or just a general full body stretch. And Drew Brees was actually a client of Stretch Zone in the last several years that he was playing in the NFL for the Saints. That's how he learned about the concept. At this point, he already had a pretty impressive resume in the franchises that he was involved in. So I'm sure, I don't know if he expressed an interest first or if Stretch Zone went to him. I'd love to, hear the story behind that, but I'm sure it was a no-brainer for Stretch Zone to partner with Drew Brees. So he's a franchisee. I know he's opened at least one location in Louisiana already, with plans to open another 15. And he's kind of partnered at the franchisor level in a brand ambassador capacity. And then the concept that first brought Drew Brees, into this podcast with his business partner, Alex Jeter. They're partnered together in Everbowl, which is an acai bowl concept. And Drew Brees is, again, partners with Alex in that. So they own, I think, 3 or 4 of the rights to 3 or 4 states together. But then I think outside of that, Drew Brees has some other areas that he owns and is also an investor / partner at the franchisor level with Everbowl. So, I mean, just right there, it took me at least 6 or 7 minutes to run through the different concepts that Drew Brees is invested in as a franchisee, but also at the franchisor level with some of them. And so, as I was kind of, I've known just being in franchising that, Drew Brees owns some franchises, but, until I decided to really, kind of dig in and do a spotlight on him and do a little more research, I didn't realize the full extent to which, he's involved and invested in franchising. And it's been really interesting. I mean, talking with Alex was enlightening for me. He mentioned several times just how great of a business partner Drew Brees is. And not just because he's, got financial resources due to his many years playing in the NFL and endorsements and all of that. Certainly that helps, but he's seems to have a great business mind. He seems to be a phenomenal leader and puts other people first. And that, has seemed to really not only help him in his career as a professional athlete, but also now that he's, focused more on the business side of things. So, his business partners speak highly of him. I think a lot of times when, you hear of professional athletes or, celebrities of some sort being involved in business ventures, people tend to think, well, they're probably only in the picture because of their money or someone, brought them in as a partner. So, they could leverage their name and their brand recognition. And I'm sure that's the case for, plenty of professional athletes and celebrities out there that, are invested or partnered with brands. But in the case of Drew Brees, it really does seem like he's a genuinely very, very intelligent business person and a true asset to these brands that he's a franchisee with and invested at the franchisor level as well. If you're listening to this podcast, then there's a good chance that you're looking to create more freedom in your own life. There's also a good chance that you realize that owning your own business can be a great way to take more control of your livelihood and create more of that freedom that we're all looking for. Also, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you realize that I specialize in franchise ownership. In addition to owning franchise businesses myself, I have a franchise consulting firm, Path to Freedom, where I help people navigate what is typically an overwhelming process of understanding franchising, identifying specific franchise companies that could be a fit, and then conducting the due diligence in a thorough and efficient manner with those franchise brands. My whole purpose here is to leverage my experience working for franchisors, owning franchises myself, and how we've been able to use that to create more freedom in our lives and help you determine if that could be a path that makes sense for you as well. So if any of this sounds interesting, if you've considered business ownership in the past, whether you've explored franchising specifically or not, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to learn more about you and what it is that you're working towards in your life and determine if I may be in a position to help. A great starting point is the link below in the show notes, which will take you to a short form to fill out, and you'll receive a free copy of an ebook that I've put together, The 7 Steps to Freedom Through Franchise Ownership. That'll also get us connected, and I'd love to set up an introductory call where I can explain a little bit more about the process that I use to help people determine if franchise ownership could be a great way to start charting their own path to freedom. So click the link below in the show notes, receive the ebook, and let's get connected. I'd love to hear from you. I also thought it was interesting, some of the criteria that Drew Brees has, openly talked about that he looks for, in a franchise that he may be interested in. And seems like the one thing that every single one of these brands that he's a franchisee with has in common is that he was a customer first. Right. So with Jimmy John's, ate there frequently in college while he was at Purdue. That ended up being the first franchise business that he invested in. With Dunkin, I didn't find a whole lot in terms of what the attraction was, but, most people are, fans of a good donut if it gets put in front of them. Walk-Ons, he met the founders. It was another Louisiana company. I read a quote from him where the first time he went to the original Walk-Ons location there in Baton Rouge, he said, if I were ever going to open a sports bar, this is exactly the type of atmosphere that I would want to create. So, he was a customer. He enjoyed the experience, thought the food was great. All of that was kind of a prerequisite for him, before any discussions around getting involved in any capacity. Everbowl, I think Alex told this story on the podcast, but I read it in a few articles as well. It was really over COVID that the conversations between Everbowl and Drew Brees started in terms of, him potentially getting involved. Drew Brees and his family were regular customers of Everbowl. And when Everbowl shut down, like many other businesses did during the pandemic, they converted their model so that customers could order and have the ingredients for the acai bowls shipped to them in, boxes with dry ice or whatever was needed. So they could kind of have all the items that they needed to make their own acai bowls at home. So Drew Brees apparently placed the largest order that Everbowl had ever received for these at-home acai bowls. And he said him and his family were eating, acai bowls almost every single morning while, the pandemic was going on and lockdowns were in place and these sort of things. So it was, again, customer first, big fan of the product, that then led to discussions around him becoming involved as a franchisee. And in the case of Everbowl, at the franchisor level as well. I think I mentioned it already, but with Stretch Zone, he was a customer first. It was part of his, training and recovery protocol while he was still playing in the NFL. So, that should say something. The fact that, the New Orleans Saints or any other professional football team, it's got to have extensive resources when it comes to their locker rooms, their training, their doctors and medical professionals on staff. And so the fact that Drew Brees, in addition to all of that, supplemented some of his recovery by going to the local Stretch Zone, should tell you something. So the point of all that is, Drew Brees, to me, is clearly a very, very savvy, franchise investor, franchise owner. Doesn't seem to have any ego whatsoever in terms of, everything he did playing professional football at a very high level. He seems to be a leader with humility, but also, very, very intelligent, very business savvy, but also someone that's not afraid to roll his sleeves up and, get out there on the front lines of, these businesses that he owns or is a partner in. Just seems very, very generous with his time, with his knowledge. Just seems like an all-around great guy. He's clearly having, a ton of success as a franchisee, as a franchisor. And, to me, it's really cool, to see someone like Drew Brees leveraging the franchise model like so many others have. And it's just another example. And this is really what I'm hoping to convey through this franchisee spotlight series, that, franchising is not just, small business opportunities. It can and will be that for many people. And that's great and fine, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be limited to, oh, I own, one single location of this franchise, or, I'm a franchisee with this brand. Drew Brees is just another great example of someone that, thinks big, is able to execute, and he's literally building an empire for himself through franchising, right? He's building a portfolio of brands that, he owns as a franchisee, many of which at this point he's, partnered in at the franchisor level. All right. And just like in the first episode I did with, spotlighting the largest franchisee in the world, Drew Brees is another kind of extreme example, right? Many people may be sitting there thinking, yeah, well, I don't have the money that Drew Brees had after playing in the NFL for 20 years. Fair enough, but there's plenty of other people. In fact, the largest franchisee in the world, started with Applebee's, with a couple of locations, and since then has built to well over 2,000 locations across 6 or 7 different brands. So, is everyone going to go out there and build that type of an empire on the back of franchising? Certainly not. Right. Some people because the desire's not there, some people because the skill set's not there. But I really just want to point out the fact that, franchising can open so many doors. There's so many different directions that one could go in, once they get into franchising, once they get that first business up and running, once they get some of the financial resources coming in that, a good profitable business can provide for the owner. There's any number of directions that someone could go in from that point. And so hopefully you find this interesting. I'm fascinated with these types of stories. If you can't tell, I nerd out on this type of stuff, but I'm going to continue to do these franchisee spotlights and showcase other examples of, people like Drew Brees that are, building their own empire through franchising. So thanks for tuning in. Share this with anyone else that you think may find it interesting, and keep tuning in each week for new podcasts and new video content over on YouTube. Thanks so much. Go drop in.